Welcome to the NBAV podcast.
Welcome back to NBAV, the NBA Avenue podcast, coming to you in the immediate aftermath of the Game 7 victory where the Cleveland Cavaliers, on the back of Donovan Mitchell, defeated the Orlando Magic at home, getting the victory and going on to the second round to face Boston. And we got to talk about all aspects of this game, all aspects of the future. The way the game started off is Orlando was playing great and Cleveland couldn't get a shot to go down. Orlando was playing on the back of, obviously, who they played on the back of all year, Paolo Banchero. Now, I actually got to see the Magic play in person this year over at Footprint Center a little bit earlier on in the year, maybe like 35 games into the season, when it was obvious that the Magic were already playing very well. And I watched them, and my thoughts about this team was, wow, Orlando has a terrible team. And the Suns actually won that game. But you saw really a pretty good idea of what that team was in the sense that Paolo Banchero was unbelievable. He was amazing in that game like he was for the entire season. And Franz Wagner played very well in that game too. There was a stretch in the third quarter of that game where Wagner scored several baskets in a row with crafty layups, kind of slow motion layups going to the basket, very similar to the way he really played the entire year. So you watch that game, and it actually ended up being pretty accurate because Suggs was pretty good as well. And the number one player on the court was Banchero. The number two player on the court for Orlando was Franz Wagner. And then you got a timely three here and there from Wendell Carter. You got an effort play here and there from Mo Wagner. Jonathan Isaac didn't play in that game, I believe. But really, as a whole, you got a pretty good idea of who the team was. It was a team that had a bunch of guards. Anthony Black played and was a non-factor. You had the other couple of guards who are kind of underwhelming. Gary Harris, Markelle Fultz, Cole Anthony. For the most part, though, that team that I saw in that game was kind of the team that Orlando was. They were a team that was lacking talent from the guard position, but a team that played on the back of Paolo Banchero and went probably as almost as far as you could imagine this team would ever go. I mean, had they won the series, winning this Game 7, it would have been a monumental collapse by Cleveland. It would have been depression in Cleveland. Cleveland had a much better team. Just compare the rosters. Cleveland didn't just have one great player. Cleveland had Donovan Mitchell. They also had Darius Garland. And then they had, for the series of the Jared Allen, didn't get to play that much. You have Allen and you have Mobley, so you have some depth there. You have the athleticism of Okoro. Then you also have Niang, who had a really good season. And you have Merrill, who comes in and shoots threes off the bench. You have Tristan Thompson at the bottom of the bench. You have Karis LeVert with his athleticism and his scoring. You have Max Strus, who sometimes catches fire coming off the bench or starting. Doesn't really matter. You have a pretty good team. Cleveland has a good team, and they played really well for most of the year until Donovan Mitchell went out. With, the broken nose, some sort of facial injury. They were really good, and they're a very solid team. They didn't play like that because they played the way they played in this game and the way they played in a lot of the series was just Mitchell playing great. And that's not the way this team was designed. This was designed to be an all-around team, and that's the way they played for the entire season. They played like an all-around pretty good basketball team, and when Donovan Mitchell was on the court and you had Niang and others and Strus playing well, this was a very good team. On the other hand, for Orlando, they were kind of not a great team the whole season. They were a team that played great defense. They were a team that played great effort, but it was mostly on the back of their star. And I would say superstar. I don't think it's a secret. This guy is going to be a potential, he's going to be a multi-time MVP. This guy is unbelievable. I walked out of that game in Phoenix and I'm like, oh my God, this guy's ridiculous. Paolo Banchero is unbelievable. And you got Jalen Suggs finally playing a pretty healthy season. And he was great. He was better than anyone could have possibly imagined. I know that he didn't hit that many of his three-point shots today, but for the season, you have to be super happy with the production you got from those two guys, Banchero and Jalen Suggs. And with Franz Wagner, you got to be happy with what he gave you during the regular season, but not really from the three-point line. And considering that he has a finesse game and the playoffs are a lot more physical, it makes sense that his game didn't translate well to the playoffs. Now, you can take it either way. You could say this was his first taste of the playoffs, so he played 7 games and it wasn't great. And the next time it's going to be better. Or you could say, hey, the style of play that he has doesn't really look like the type of thing that's going to adapt well to the playoffs for his career. And you have no way of knowing which one's going to come out to be true. Because if he doesn't end up being a great shooter for his career, he's probably not going to ever be that great in the playoffs. And if his lack of a physical style of play never improves or doesn't improve that much, it may never adapt well to the playoffs. But if somehow he manages to start shooting better every season his three-point percentage climbs a little bit, and he gets stronger and stronger and adapts better and better to the physical style of the game, well, that's the bet that you're going to have to take, and those are the two sides to it. If he becomes a legitimate number 2 championship-level player, then you want to keep him. Because ultimately, it's very good to keep players together for a long time. When you come up with a couple of young players on the same team together, you kind of want them to build that rapport and get older together. That builds camaraderie. That's how Golden State did it. They had Steph, Clay, and Draymond come into the league at around the same time. And those players stayed together, and they're still together today. So if Franz Wagner is that level of talent, then you would want to keep them together. But if you see the way he played in this series, and you say, hey, I actually have a lot of inside information, and I don't think it's going to adapt well long term, then now might be the time to trade him, because there are going to be plenty of other teams in the league who are going to say, this guy had a bad playoffs, but we have a young team, and we would like to have this guy on our team. It would be really interesting. And this is just a crazy, crazy scenario to think of. But I'm going to build into it. I'm going to build into the scenario here by starting off with moving over to Cleveland. Donovan Mitchell won this series by himself. He put this team on his back. He did it on one leg. In the first half of this Game 7, you watch Donovan Mitchell and you're like, yeah, as long as the game is close going into the fourth quarter, Orlando's going to take it because Mitchell's just not going to be able to survive. He's not going to be able to carry this team in the fourth quarter. So just keep it close, stay a few points in front, and when it comes down to the final few minutes of the fourth quarter, your defense will pull this game out. That wasn't what happened. Mitchell somehow managed to keep it going the entire game. I don't know how he did it. The guy's been operating on one leg for a couple of games now, and somehow he managed to put up nearly 40 points and 10 rebounds, just absolutely ridiculous. But what kind of expectations do you have as a Cleveland Cavaliers team? You just have your best player worn out, heading into a series against the best team in the league, the Boston Celtics. Even Garland had a couple of hand moments in this game where it seemed like his hand was starting to hurt him. And I'm sure the entire team is pretty worn out after playing a 7-game series. Meanwhile, it feels like Boston won their series ages ago. And they're going to be ready, and they're pretty much healthy with the exception of Porzingis, who they don't even need to beat the Cavaliers. Not to mention, you have this weirdness sitting in the back of your mind where everyone's been talking about how Donovan Mitchell doesn't even want to be in Cleveland. He never wanted to be in Cleveland. And he still doesn't want to be in Cleveland. But at the end of the day, Mitchell showed that he was ready. And again, Garland showed that he was not ready. And if you trade Mitchell off this team, you have nothing. You have absolutely zero. Because you saw from this entire season that when Mitchell was there, you were one of the best teams in the league, potentially a 2 seed. And when Mitchell wasn't there, you guys were a bad team. You were an under 500 team. You were barely a playoff team. And in the playoffs, it just got further amplified. Mitchell was the only one who was ready. Garland wasn't ready. Garland has all the moves. He has the shiftiness. He has the quickness. He has the shot-making ability. But he has recklessness. He turns the ball over. He gets stupid fouls. He plays beyond himself. He drives into the lane and doesn't have that touch near the basket, which Donovan Mitchell does have. There are several areas of the game that Darius Garland has got to refine if he's going to be that guy. He just wasn't ready for it yet. And I'm sure it'll just get even more pronounced against Boston. But if you trade Donovan Mitchell right now, you got nothing. And what I would want to explore is, You have two teams here. They just played each other in 7 games. Donovan Mitchell absolutely destroyed the Magic, and Franz Wagner played terribly in the entire series, and he continued to shoot poorly from 3. And he was playing for foul calls, which he wasn't getting. He was trying to get foul calls like he's LeBron James, and it's like, dude, you've been in the league for a couple of seasons. It's your first taste of the playoffs. Don't expect to be getting foul call treatment like you're Luka Doncic. I know you might model your game after him, but don't expect to be getting foul calls like you're Steph Curry. You're a baby in this league. But what are the odds that maybe the Cleveland Cavaliers, who might be forced to trade Donovan Mitchell at some point, if they traded him to Orlando, Orlando would probably love to have Donovan Mitchell. He would be such a ridiculous upgrade at the guard position over all of their guys. And you could pair him with Jalen Suggs, who provides defense. And suddenly Paolo Banchero has a legitimate number 2 behind him. Donovan Mitchell would be an incredible sidekick to Paolo Banchero, where it's undeniable that Paolo Banchero would be the number 1 and Donovan Mitchell would be a great number 2. It's probably the best position that Donovan Mitchell could ever be. Maybe he's not designed to be the number 1. Maybe the best version of Donovan Mitchell is a number 2 behind a guy as dominant, as physically dominant as Paolo Banchero. And if you then build out that roster with Donovan Mitchell behind Paolo Banchero, you have Jalen Suggs there, Jonathan Isaac, and maybe some other ancillary pieces. Wow, that's really going to be an incredible roster moving forward. Whereas Cleveland might say, yeah, give us a couple of draft picks. Give us Franz Wagner, and we'll build around Wagner and Darius Garland and some of the other guys that we have. There's a world where that can happen. Just think about that. It's so wild. What a wild scenario. And I know that Orlando fans don't like hearing about trading Franz Wagner. And in truth, I don't really like those type of trades either. Because when a guy is that young, you don't really want to trade him. But the problem is, and the reason why I think it's actually a valid and fair take to think about trading him right now, it's because you are on an accelerated timeline for one reason and one reason only. Because Paolo Banchero is that ridiculous of a player. And he's that far ahead of his time. He had a shot-making ability in the clutch that he showed at Duke, and it translates right over to the NBA. No problem. This guy was NBA ready from day one. And you have a once-in-a-generation type player who is NBA ready, who's NBA body ready, who's physically ready, who's emotionally ready and mentally ready, like Paolo Banchero. This guy is something you get once in a generation. This is even a level beyond a guy like Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards is a guy who has all the talent. But Paolo Banchero is a guy in a LeBron James body. This is a whole nother deal. Anthony Edwards would not have been able to take this Orlando Magic team that far. Paolo Banchero carried this team on his back. Anthony Edwards has a ton of help out there in Minnesota. He's got a legitimate rim protector in Rudy Gobert. He's got Karl Anthony Towns, who's very talented. He's got Naz Reid, an incredible 6-man coming off the bench. He has veterans who've been playing very well, like Mike Conley. He has Nickeil Alexander-Walker offering him depth. He has Jaden McDaniels, who plays incredible defense with incredible hustle, hits the timely three-point shot. I mean, they really have a good team there in Minnesota, and a committed team. Orlando doesn't have a great team. They have Paolo Banchero, who makes them worthy of being in the playoffs and maybe going to a round 2. It's all on the back of Banchero. And a lot of credit has to go to Jalen Suggs as well. Even though he didn't play up to his top ability in this Game 7, he's been the number 2 guy in this playoffs for them. So it's very interesting, and I know you don't want to trade a guy who you've grown to love in Franz Wagner, but based on the intel that you have, there's a fork in the road right now. And the fork in the road is one side saying that Franz Wagner is going to become a legitimate number 2 or number 3 player on a championship-worthy team, or it's that he's going to be a touch below that, a 4th or 5th or 6th player. on a championship team. And if he's in that realm, you may as well trade him out now and use him as the key featured piece to which a trade will be centered around to bring in a legitimate number 2, like a Donovan Mitchell. Because that team, oh my goodness, if you could get a guy like Donovan Mitchell or a guy like a Tyrese Maxey onto this Orlando team, or if you could get a Joel Embiid, oh my goodness, if you could get a player who some other team is forced to trade, if you could get, I don't know, a Trae Young, is that a move? I don't know. Maybe that's not a great one, but there's got to be a few other players in the league where it's like if you pull them in right now, watch out. Watch out for how far this team could go. They're going to suddenly be Eastern Conference favorites. The East is weak. The Magic are strong behind Banchero. You've got to consider it. And there's a reason why being a GM is not done. It's not a job that you give to a fan of the team because the fans grow to love their guys. And when you have a team that was so under-talented like Orlando and you didn't really expect them to even make the playoffs, and then not only do they make the playoffs, they easily make the playoffs. And they get to play Cleveland and they play them to a 7-game series, which they nearly win. That's a team that you grow to love because they didn't do it necessarily with being the most talented team. They did it with hustle and defense and playing hard and having one amazing player. That's a team when they overachieve like that you grow to love. And then when you love a team, you don't want to trade the pieces off that team. You love them. You love those players. But the GM has tough decisions to make. And he has to say, hey, I have a future top 5 player in the league who right now may even be a top 10 player in the league, certainly top 15. And if I can pair him with a legitimate number 2 star right now, we might be able to make it to the conference finals next year. That is the kind of timeline this team is flirting with in Orlando. I'm as strong as a believer in Paolo Banchero as anyone, but I'm not a very strong believer in Franz Wagner. I'm intrigued. I'm uncertain about how good he can become, but not every young, promising player is going to become a number 2 on a championship team-worthy player. Not every young player becomes Klay Thompson. Not every young player becomes the Scottie Pippen to Michael Jordan. You hope that they'll become that. You hope Franz Wagner will become that, but you don't know that he will. He might forever be a guy who settles into being, a promising, talented guy, but maybe he only ends up being Tobias Harris long term. I know that's a very bleak thought, but maybe Franz Wagner only ends up being, let's try to give a good example. Maybe he turns into a lesser Paul George. Maybe that's not even a good example. Let's try to bring more examples. Who can Franz Wagner? Let's just look at the entire list of NBA teams right now. Let's try to come up with some comparison for who he could end up being, where it would kind of be a little bit less than you had imagined. Does he end up being? Let's look at not Oklahoma City. That's not a good example. Let's look at Miami. Not a good example. Chicago. Does he only end up being DeMar DeRozan? Is that enough? What if he's not even as good as DeMar DeRozan for his career? There's no saying that Franz Wagner is going to eventually be as good as DeMar DeRozan. What if Franz Wagner only ends up being as good as a Brandon Ingram for his career? And that's not even a terrible comparison. They're both better from 2 than they are from 3. They're both kind of long. Brandon Ingram is a better player than him right now. Over the next 5 years, does Franz Wagner become better than Brandon Ingram? I don't know. That's a tough question. Brandon Ingram is probably even a little bit physically stronger. Now, Franz Wagner has time. Time is on his side, but ultimately, is Franz Wagner going to become better than Desmond Bain? Probably not. Desmond Bain is really, really good. And he's the number 2 on a Grizzlies team behind John Morant. Is Franz going to be on that level? That's a legitimate question. Is Franz Wagner going to be better than Domantas Sabonis? And there are many people out there, myself included, who don't even think that highly of Sabonis. Is Franz Wagner going to be the is he going to be the Kyrie Irving to your Luka Doncic? Probably not. So you got to think about what is necessary to do. What is necessary in order to bring in a legitimate number 2 talent behind Paolo Banchero? Because that's what you want. You want to have a legitimate number 2 guy there to take this team to championship level. And I don't know how else you're going to get that guy. Are you going to get him in free agency? It's going to be hard. You might have to do it between getting a little bit lower level guys in free agency and getting the number 2 player by way of trade. And by way of using your draft assets and your ancillary pieces. If you could package together Franz Wagner over to the Miami Heat and bring in a Jimmy Butler, or you could package Franz Wagner and go get Donovan Mitchell, these are legitimate options right now that could pull you into title contention over the next 2-3 seasons. And you got to consider that. So, food for thought. Some food for thought right there. We move firmly into the second round. And we're going to pull up the NBA playoff bracket just to make sure, although I'm pretty sure we know everyone off the top of our heads who's playing each other, but let's just pull it up just for certainty's sake and to not make ourselves look foolish. Let's go Thunder versus Dallas. This is the really, really tough series to predict. Because the Thunder have gone so far under the radar because they've played such a bad playoff team in the first round, in the New Orleans Pelicans playing without Zion. And because of how well Anthony Edwards has played with the Minnesota and all the headline and attention that Edwards and Minnesota have gotten, they've totally swept Oklahoma City under the carpet. Oklahoma City is the stealth contender here. Nobody even has their eyes on them. And you have Dallas, who has the depth. And you have Oklahoma City, who has some pretty good depth as well. This is a very, very intriguing series where the Thunder are the number 1 overall team. If you pull up the Thunder roster, let's just take a look at their depth. They obviously have the MVP candidate in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You have the number 2 player in J-Dub. And then it's the Dort and Giddey and Cason Wallace and the other Jalen Williams and Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins. Chet Holmgren is young. Gordon Hayward is coming off the bench. So the depth definitely has to go over to Dallas, and the experience has to go to Dallas. It's hard for me to see Oklahoma City completely winning the series. It would have to come by heroics from SGA, especially inside. How is Oklahoma City going to defend against Dallas inside? Daniel Gafford is going to feast on the offensive glass and the defensive glass, and Blake Lively is going to get dunk after dunk after dunk when he's in the game. I'm sorry, Derek Lively. They're going to feast on the inside, and then Dallas has depth for days. Even if Hardaway is injured in the series, they have Derek Jones Jr., who can airplane mode his way to a lot of offensive rebounds and good defense. PJ Washington's going to play good defense. You have Maxi Kleba coming off the bench. You have so many pieces behind Luka and Kyrie. So, yeah, I see Dallas winning this game in maybe in six. Let's see if Oklahoma City can win a game or two. I believe so. I think 6 is fair. If Oklahoma City could push this to 7, that'd be very impressive. Minnesota already took game 1 against Denver. And what I had said heading into the playoffs was that I predicted that it would be Dallas coming out of the Western Conference. Why? Because I thought when Dallas played against Denver, Denver is a very, very good team and a championship level team, but they're a more shallow team compared to Dallas. Dallas has the depth, amplified by the fact that Jamal Murray is so frequently injured. And this is what we said before the playoffs. This is not just what I'm saying now. I thought that ultimately the odds of Jamal Murray getting injured were pretty high. And when that happens, Denver doesn't really have enough depth behind him. I know Reggie Jackson's played well, but without Jamal Murray, this team can't win the championship. Whereas Dallas can lose a few players and still be a championship level team as long as they don't lose Luka. And Luka and Kyrie, they seem to be fine. So ultimately, my thoughts about what might happen to the Nuggets against Dallas came into play a little bit early because Jamal Murray's hurt. He's playing on one leg. He had a bad first half in game 1, and this is really coming into play because Minnesota has the depth to tango and to tangle with them. And in game 1, you had the incredible Anthony Edwards come out extremely hot. Now, he's not going to necessarily come out that way every game. So, yeah, Denver's going to win a bunch of ball games. It's going to be a good series, and it's going to go 6 or 7 games. And it's easy for me to say that because Minnesota already won the first one. So Denver's probably going to come back. They'll win the second one. They'll probably win one of the games in Minnesota as well. This could be a 2-2 series going back, and then it might go 7 games unless Denver's able to do something incredible. But I don't see this. I don't see Minnesota winning it in 6. This is going to go all the way to 7 unless Denver goes on a run and takes it before then. Probably a 7-game series is what you have right here. If Naz Reid is able to play that level, they didn't even get a great Karl Anthony Towns game relative to what Anthony Edwards and Naz Reid did. And Mike Conley's playing out of his mind for the whole playoffs. So ultimately, I still see Denver taking this in 7 if Jamal Murray is able to get enough out of himself. If not, then Minnesota's going to take it. But either way, I still see, if the Nuggets can come out of this, I still see them losing to Dallas in the conference finals like I originally thought. And if Minnesota wins this, well, that'll still be an awesome series against Dallas. But I see Denver taking it in 7. And if Jamal Murray is not able to get it going, then frankly, Minnesota will probably take it in 7 or 6. Then in the Eastern Conference, a lot easier to predict. The Knicks are going to dominate the Pacers inside. They're going to dominate on the offensive glass. They're going to be a better defensive team, a more committed team, and ultimately they're a better team. They play better as a team. They pass the ball better. They shoot the ball better. And the Pacers are an offensive team. Tyrese Halliburton started off the season hot, ended off the season cold. Siakam is good, but defensively they leave a lot to be desired. And the Knicks are the better team. They can win this in 5 or 6 games. The Knicks can win this series. And that's what I think will happen. The Celtics, they're the best team in the league. They're going against a beat-up Cleveland Cavaliers team that just went 7 games against Orlando, barely emerged victorious. And Donovan Mitchell's hurt. Darius Garland's not ready, and the Celtics are going to cream them. It's going to be a sweep or a 5-game series, and then you're going to have the Knicks against the Celtics, which is what everyone wants to see anyway. But the conference finals are going to be incredible, and the conference semifinals are already incredible in the West. They'll be okay in the East. As always, we're your source for a great time every time, and until next time, we are out.